Hey everybody, welcome back to another Star Rod mapping tutorial. Today we're going to cover how to minimize the amount of lag that you see in your rooms. I was actually prompted to make this video because I was watching some other videos of other hacks and saw there was a persistent problem for a lot of them with managing the amount of lag that happens in some of their maps, especially maps that have a lot of geometry and a lot of collision. And there's some pretty common mistakes, and some are simpler to solve than others. And there's a lot of different things that can go into what makes your room lag. And we're going to cover all of them briefly. And you'll see that there's all these white lines around these models here, and these are what you call bounding boxes. They're essentially the 3D canvas of the geometry. So their volume will contain the geometry of the model. So for this model, for example, this is the minimum volume required to hold it. And so when you step inside of a bounding box, it doesn't really matter in this case for geometry, but it does matter in the case of collision when we're talking about lag. So it's a bit harder to see in Star Rod. The lines for the bounding boxes are not great, but there's another way to see them. You can select the bounding boxes right here in viewports, but you can also just select the collision. And all these flashing lines here is this is going to be your bounding box for this collision. And now you'll see the way I've set this up for my map, because at one point this map was actually very laggy. It's a very large map. And there was multiple reasons why that was. But the biggest reason was because of the collision. I did not have the collision set up very well. The bounding box of all this collision here actually stretched out like this. So it was one big rectangle. So whenever you step inside this bounding box, all of this collision is going to activate. So the collision doesn't activate if you're just standing on it. It actually activates if you're standing in the bounding box. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about where you are touching the collision itself. As long as you're within its bounding box, it will activate that collision. So to optimize this, what you're going to want to do is reduce the amount of overlap between collision. So you'll see I split this wall here, so it's just this thinner rectangle, so it'll only activate if Mario walks inside of this bounding box. And I did the same for this wall here. So now there's no overlap. And now there are cases where you're going to have overlap, but you want to try to limit it as much as possible. And also what you don't want to do is have one big collider like this stretching all the way out here. And I actually think I had the collision all the way up there too. You want to reduce the amount of triangles as much as possible. Even if it means having a lot of individual colliders, that's a lot better than having all of them attached together, because you're going to be activating way too much collision if they're all grouped together, and it's going to cause a lot of lag. So I just have these 3 chunks here, and the map ran much more smoothly after that. But that wasn't the only thing that reduced the lag in this room. There were some other problems. One of the big ways to immediately get rid of a lot of lag in your map is just to delete all the models. Now, you probably don't want to do that for your maps. It's kind of counterintuitive. But there's a reason for that, and we can find alternatives to just deleting them all. We can optimize them instead. So let's say, for example, this floor here was actually like I had an individual model for this loading zone here, and this floor up around here is a different model too. Well, the thing is, these are the same texture, so there isn't any real reason for them not to be just the same model. And by combining these models together, it'll actually reduce the amount of times that the game has to load this texture here. And that saves, I don't know the exact amount of frames it saves, but it adds up the more that you combine. So one way to increase, to further better the lag in this map would be to just combine these models together, so I don't have to have all of these individual models. Now the map actually loads fine as it is right now, so I don't need to do that right now, but if it was super laggy, I would consider combining all of those floors together, so it only loads this grass texture once. But I do that for a couple of other models here, so you'll see all these bushes are combined. Even all these grass pieces are combined too, and I think the flowers are the same. Yep. So it only has to load this texture once. You'll see up here, there's 3 for different parts of the room. So there's another one down here, but it's much better than having them all just be individual. You can see I've combined a lot of models together. And something that can also happen when you're making your map and you don't realize, when you delete models, sometimes they'll leave behind stray triangles and it won't actually delete the model. So I recommend going through your model tree and just going to the display list here and arrow keying down through them all just to make sure that there's nothing that says draw 0 triangles here. If you have any model that's drawing 0 triangles, it's just taking up space for no reason. So you should just delete it. And there's lots of that in some of my maps, and even just deleting those cleared up so much lag. Now I've already done this for this map, so there won't be any 0 triangles here. And then there's some other ways to reduce lag too with geometry, but it's not as straightforward as the other steps. But we can also fuse the vertices, and what this does is it actually reduces the amount of normals that the game is calculating, the directions, the vertice normals. If you fuse all the vertices together, it actually reduces the amount of vertices in the room. Problem is, when you do this, for some models, it'll screw up the texture. So you have to be careful with that. It'll be easier for some others, like for these bushes. If you clone them, for example, sometimes it'll actually automatically defuse the vertices. So it's best to, for like models like this that are not connected at all, you can easily just select them all and then fuse vertices. And also in the bottom right here, you can clean up the triangles too. I don't always do this because I like to have the ability to select the individual triangles, but I don't know how much it'll fix it, but I do think that it does reduce a bit of lag if you clean this all up, so it just only draws them once. But I haven't noticed a huge difference doing that. Okay, and another very easy way you can, well actually, back on the whole fusing thing, a much easier way to fuse vertices together is in collision. You don't have to worry about UVs at all. It won't mess up anything, it won't mess up your UV paint. So you can just freely select Control A, all of your collision, and just fuse it. In order to fuse them though, you'll need to make sure that the vertices are actually overlapped. So everything has to be the same height, same position. Doing that will also clear up a lot of lag. Okay. So the next one would be cleaning up degenerates in your room. The degenerates are basically just vertices that don't really have any geometry or any collision. They're just there. They're just stray, abandoned from the actual geometry or collision. And that can happen sometimes when you just generate geometry or you generate collision. It'll create all these degenerates that you don't need. They're not doing anything. So in order to make sure that those are all gone, again, you just Control A, both for collision and for models. It won't actually affect your models at all. You can clean up degenerates, cladders, clean up degenerates. Okay, and nothing's changed, but if there were a bunch of degenerates in this geometry or collision, they would be gone now, and less for the game to calculate. Although you have to be careful, if you watched my video on rendering, you'll know that there are tricks to make certain models render in front of others, and those do use degenerates. Like for example, if I wanted this waterfall, if this waterfall wasn't rendering in front properly, I could always clone a triangle of it, so it's still the same model. Control T, scale, uniform scale down to 0, like this, and that'll create a degenerate. You see it's disappeared. And that'll just make sure that it renders first, but if you have that and you clean it up, then it's gone and it won't render it anymore. So, okay. Now there's also some things you can do within the code itself to really reduce the lag. And I'm talking like, if you want to have really big maps and after all of this stuff you tried, it's still not, it's just too big, it's not reducing the lag at all, there are some other things you can do. And this will actually let you have very large, complex maps with virtually zero lag, as long as it's not all on screen at once. And you can do this through a custom col script. Basically what you want to do is you want to set up a loop and have this run on the map in the main script, and it's going to track the player position. So in this case, for this map that I have this in, if Mario's X is greater than 64, it's going to disable these two models, and it's going to enable this model. And if he goes past that point again, if his X is less than 64, then it's going to enable those two that were disabled and disable the one that was enabled here. And it's just going to continuously loop this. You'll see there's no real reason for this map to be loading all the data of these models all the way over here if Mario is over here. So I could put a lot of these models into one group. Can just call it col right. Okay. Just take these models, put it into the group, and now all I have to do is whatever coordinate is about right here, whenever Mario crosses this line, the game will just hide all of this. There is some that wasn't a... You have to separate some of it just to make it easier, but just to make sure that it doesn't hide the geometry over here, but you get the point. It'll hide all of this geometry over here when you cross this line, and all of a sudden the game will run super smoothly because all it has to load is the geometry in this chunk here. And you can do the same this side too. It'll disable all of these models over here. And you can do those, or do this for those big maps that you have, and it will make them super smooth. Okay. Now, some other lag that happens can be caused by NPCs, for example. So if you have a lot of NPCs in your map, you're going to quickly notice that the game is getting laggier and laggier. Now that might be because you're not using the proper flags, and the flags that you're using for your NPCs are a bit too calculation heavy. Now these are the these are the flags that the original game uses for a lot of NPCs I found, particularly the just wandering casual NPCs. In Hex it is 0x000002D09. This will not project the shadow, so if it's, as long as the NPC is not flying, you can use this one. But if you do have a flying NPC, then you probably want to have the shadow project so it's not floating midair. So you just get rid of the two. And for these are just the debug names. I'm not sure if they have specific names in StarRod, but I will say them. The flags would be NPC flag passive, NPC flag no project shadow, NPC flag 100, NPC flag no wave movement, NPC flag lock anims, NPC flag enable hit script. These flags together will drastically reduce the amount of lag that each individual NPC emits. And you can also take it one step further, and instead of having an individual group for each NPC, you can put them all into one group here. So I have all these kids, these polar bear kids from my game, in one single group. And unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly how to do it in StarRod because this is in decomp and the code is different. But you can. There is a way to do that, and I would just recommend finding other maps, because I know a lot of maps from the original do the same thing. They have all the NPCs combined in groups instead of individuals. Okay, and that's pretty much it. There are other things that can cause lag, like particle effects and stuff, but those are a bit more straightforward. Just be careful using too many particle effects. Not only can it make your maps lag, but it can also crash your game if they get a little out of hand. I think scrolling textures also can affect lag, and also the shake cam function, but as long as you're using all these tricks that I talked about in the video, your maps probably won't be laggy enough where you'll notice those actually have an effect. So you'll be able to do a lot more with your maps as long as you're careful with your geometry and you're careful with your collision. Alright, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.